Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. I'm here with Mr. Jayant Anand, who is the Dean of Math, Science, and Health Services at North Hennepin Community College. How are you doing here today, Mr. Jayant Anand?
I'm doing very well. Nice to be with you, Gautam.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time out your day to be here. And let's get started. What would you say are some reasons or influences which drew you towards sociology and anthropology?
So I got into sociology and anthropology somewhat in a long-winded fashion. When I was doing my undergraduate degree, it was in statistics. Everyone at that time in my in my era was going and getting a business degree right after undergrad, and so that's what I did.
Hmm.
And when I was pursuing my master's in management studies and specializing in marketing, that's the first time, in fact, when I encountered the disciplines of sociology and anthropology in any serious way. And that was through a course in consumer behavior. And that really got me thinking. And so as things panned out after that, I decided to go and pursue my graduate degree in sociology first, and MA in sociology. And then I continued to enjoy that. And so I kept forging ahead. Then eventually ended up with my doctoral degree in anthropology, looking at the retail evolution in central Mexico and how mom and pop stores have managed in light of free trade agreements and FDIs in retail sector and big box stores coming in and so on. So yeah, that's how it all happened.
Hmm. And before you were a dean at North Hennepin Community College, you were an interim dean at the University of Wisconsin, right?
That's right. Yes.
So what were some aspects or interests that drew you towards the dean position at North Hennepin compared to like other positions per se?
Sure. So a little bit of a quick background. I started my academic career as a teaching faculty member. So I got my doctoral degree and then went on to be a faculty member, first at the University of Puerto Rico, where I was there for a year, and teaching anthropology and sociology. Um, the desire to come back to the US mainland, I got this opportunity to teach at a two-year college in Wisconsin, in a rural town. And the population was less than 10,000.
Oh,
And we had a very small campus with about 700 students.
hmm.
And there I got the opportunity to teach anthropology and sociology. And this was mostly first generation students, low income students, students who were not really exposed to much of the world outside of their townships and county.
Hmm.
And that's sort of what really drew me towards this idea of access in higher education. That had it not been for this two-year campus in rural Wisconsin, many of these students would never have had the opportunity to pursue higher education.
Right, right.
And so I enjoyed doing that. And then gradually I got more interested in how the overall curriculum of courses in any college works, right? So I wanted to sort of branch out beyond my disciplines of sociology and anthropology. And I was having lots of good interactions, co-teaching, interdisciplinary teaching, and so on. And so that really got me into curriculum management. I started to enjoy that, got an opportunity to be an associate dean on that same campus. And uh, very soon I found myself in this interim role at Superior. Now, Superior, UW Superior is the smallest of the University of Wisconsin schools.
Hmm.
We had about 2,500 students. We had the whole range of undergraduate programs and also graduate programs.
Hmm.
Um, and so that was a really sort of good experience in terms of getting a feel for how various departments operate. What are the guidelines, for instance, in a business school versus what are the needs of in a school of education, which are guided by state laws way more than any other discipline, right? And so that experience was valuable, enjoyable. I got to learn a lot. But one thing that I kept going back to was I really was wanting to get back to a two-year college. A two-year college, primarily, like I said, these are institutions where you tend to see a very high proportion of students who have not had an opportunity to go to college in their families. They tend to be the first ones to go to college, and that's what drew me to North Hennepin Community College. Another aspect of North Hennepin Community College is that it is an extremely diverse community college. Minnesota is predominantly white, but North Hennepin Community College, we have close to 50% of our students are students of color. We have a large immigrant population from um, East and West Africa on our campus. We have immigrant populations from Southeast Asia, and we also have students who are multi-generational African American backgrounds. And so that combination of access, community college, and being in a vibrant city where the college is located, Brooklyn Park, where about a fifth of Brooklyn Park's population is foreign born.
Mm.
And so that combination is what really attracted me to North Hennepin Community College.
Hmm. And it's always good to have a very diverse college because it really brings out the true colors of a college and it really brings up a really good sense of community. And before you were at Wisconsin Superior, as you said, you were teaching out of country and you had taught at Universidad de las Americas Pueblas. So how would could you share some experiences with your time there?
Sure. One of the ways I was able to fund my doctoral fieldwork in Mexico, where I mentioned earlier, I was looking at how mom and pop stores have
Mhm.
uh, essentially stood their ground against competition from big box stores. One way I was able to pursue that opportunity was by finding a teaching position at Universidad de las Americas. Um, and it was actually my background in marketing management that got me that position.
So,
So I was teaching courses in marketing research and, uh, and qualitative and quantitative research at that university.
mhm,
It's a private university. It's a small private university. It's set up like an American university in many ways,
mhm,
but it has very unique structures that are more typical of Mexican universities. One of the things that I really learned and admired in the Mexican university setup was at Universidad de las Americas at that time, if you had to graduate with an undergraduate degree, you had to do a thesis. Right? So there was a very strong research component that the university had.
oh,
Um, and then that allowed me to work with some students and serve on their undergraduate thesis committees as an external examiner. I got to do that even with, I remember I was on a committee for a student in international relations.
mhm,
And those experiences really sort of gave me an insight into how higher education operates differently in Mexico. Uh, the other thing, of course, is when you teach at a private university, the funding model of a private university differs. They are largely tuition dependent. They are largely dependent on endowments.
right,
Um, and the clientele that the university usually gets tend to be more affluent. But one other aspect, of course, is Mexico is predominantly a monolingual country where Spanish is the dominant language. At this university, students are somewhat bilingual, and one of the reasons why they hired me was they wanted their students to get experience taking courses in English.
right,
So while I was teaching in Mexico, the university and the department chair was like, Jayant, we want you to teach in English. And my interest was like, I want to learn Spanish. And so that worked out really well. So while I taught in English, my students were fantastic in teaching me the nuances of the language, about Mexican culture. So I learned a lot about Mexican culture, at least in central Mexico.
mhm,
And, uh, and that also fed into, mm, I think, what I think was a fairly well done doctoral uh, research. So that's sort of what stayed with me through my experience at Universidad de las Americas.
mhm. And you talked about how the university was a lot of bilingual people, and the way that it's structured is kind of different from normal American universities. It has some aspects, as you were saying, and then the other aspects were mostly things that belong to Central Mexico. So, how would you say these experiences has shaped your career and helped you to give you insight?
I think anytime I face an interesting challenge at work, right? Whether as things stand in the upper Midwest right now and most of America, uh, there has been a demographic shift. Lots of colleges have seen a decline in enrollment, and there are always these pressures on how do you get more students to consider higher education? How do you bring them into the fold? And how do you give them opportunities and give them value in seeking higher education? So many of the ideas that I saw play out fairly successfully at Universidad de las Americas were things that have in some way influenced how uh, I have approached possible ideas to implement or make suggestions to my colleagues in those areas. For instance, at Universidad de las Americas, we had a partnership with two universities overseas, right? So we had a partnership with Northeastern,
Mm-hmm.
where students would get a dual degree, and then we had a partnership with a university in France. And so what uh, that did was Mexican students would uh, earn degrees from both universities, from their international university counterpart as well as Universidad de las Americas, and they had to have a residency requirement completed in the other country. So we would have students from France, from the US, uh, spend 2 years on our campus in Mexico, and we had our Mexican students go over to US and then France. And so those ideas of international exchange, for instance, uh, gave me some ideas on, could we look at partnerships? Could we look at ways in which we can create such opportunities?
Mm-hmm.
I got to work on some things like that when I was at the two-year college system in Wisconsin, for instance, where we were working with partners in overseas. It was not quite the same dual degree model, but it was like, all right, how do we make education, American education, accessible to students in Asia? And so we had a partnership with an agency in Singapore, where Singapore was the hub. We would have students from all over Southeast Asia get our courses, our degrees, or at least parts of our degrees, while sitting in Singapore, while they didn't have to bear the expense of moving to the US and all the challenges. And then when they were ready, they could come over and complete their degree here. So things like that, I think, have always been critical in terms of idea generation.
Mm-hmm. And it's always good to have a degree from different countries, experience the cultures, so that you can really grow as a person. But I want to go back to one of the points you said on how college enrollments are actually going down. You would think that they were going up because more people were seeking higher education. So would you say college enrollments are going down due to the fact that tuition and all the extra expenses are going up in cost?
I think it's a combination of things. When we look at the upper Midwest, there has actually been a population decline in some ways, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we tend to see population growth happening in a few urban centers, and those are largely driven by immigration.
Oh.
When you look at rural Wisconsin or rural Minnesota,
Mm-hmm.
there has been a population flight out in some instances. In some instances, just natural population decline. People are just having fewer children.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one aspect. The other aspect, of course, is when you, especially in a two-year college system, what happens is when the economy is doing well, uh,
Mm-hmm.
most folks who typically would be first-generation college students, they tend to go into the workforce,
Oh.
and they consider higher education when there are fewer economic opportunities, and they're like, okay, how do I develop my skills? How do I uh, find employment when there is an opportunity and so on, right? So there's a counter cyclical relationship between two-year college enrollments usually and the economy.
Oh.
the other aspect like you mentioned, cost of education is high, and for a lot of students who are first generation students, um, the very thought of foregoing income and then trying to get a college degree where you have to pay, there are very high opportunity costs for the poor,
Mm-hmm.
and that also contributes in some ways to that. Uh, uh, they have to make a choice, right? I mean, it's like, do I forego 2 years of income, and am I there as a family? Can I support that? Can I manage that? And I think so some of those challenges exist. There is also some disruptions, if you will, coming in the recent past from tech giants, where the whole idea of having a formal credential is not as big,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can build a career, uh, for instance, in the tech industry, with very little formal credentialing. Uh, some of these tech giants offer their own credentialing opportunities, and they are looking at creative thinking and talent, things that a lot of students, if they are fortunate, are able to get those talents through their K-12 education.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so there's some of that happening. About a decade ago or so, there was this whole movement towards massive online education through MOOCs, through players like edX,
Mm-hmm.
and these have been platforms where you get top-notch, high-quality instruction from highly reputable elite schools and universities across the globe. Um, and for someone who is looking at enhancing their knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and in a market where formal credentials may not necessarily be as critical, they might choose that path, right? That they might say, okay, I need to understand how a semiconductor works. And well, there is this fantastic course that is offered online for free by MIT. I learned from the very best, and I can
Okay.
apply that to my in my work situation. So I think it's a combination of these factors that uh, has been putting some pressure, especially on 2-year colleges.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I can understand that because if you can do the same skill online and you don't have to give up 2 years of income, people might be more like going towards the fact that they'll do it online.
right.
And moving on to what your responsibilities are as on a day-to-day basis as a dean of math, science, and health services.
So you could sort of break down the typical role into three aspects, right? One is the aspect that looks at uh, what do the students need,
Mm-hmm.
what does the community at large needs, right? So what are the trends in the workforce? What are the trends in higher education in general? What will give the best value to the potential student or even current students? So trying to sort of navigate that. The other aspect is if we have to deliver high quality education to our students, we need to have high quality instruction.
Right.
So working with faculty members on how they can keep their they can bring their A game uh, to the classroom every time they come into the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Finding out what kind of support they need for their own development. Um, so that's another big chunk of what a typical dean role especially in a 2-year college ends up doing. And then the third big chunk is everything requires resources, whether it be time or money
Mm-hmm.
or personnel. Um, and so that's sort of constantly trying to look at what are the resource needs? How do I make those? How do I fulfill those resource needs? Are there things that I need to scale back? Are there things that I need to invest more? Uh, and it's a so if I take all those three aspects, then no day is routine in that sense, right? So
Right.
uh, today I have a couple of meetings with students who wanted to share about their experience in the classroom. And uh, 2 days ago, I was talking to. I had a full day of meetings with faculty members where they were sharing how they have dealt with the pandemic and the changes that they had to bring in, and sharing with me what they need to make things better
Mhm.
as we move into the spring semester. Um, I was in meetings, several meetings with members of the school district, the K-12 system,
Mhm.
trying to understand what's happening in the K-12 because a lot of our students happen to be parents themselves.
Oh.
Uh,
Mhm.
and so if something happens in the K-12 system, it impacts how well our students, our students who are themselves parents, are able to cope with the pressures of college.
Mhm.
So there's never a dull moment, is all I can say. But if I look at what I end up doing, it's one of those three things all the time.
Mhm. And as you were saying, you have to deal with different kind of issues on different days. So could you give us an example of where you had to deal with a management or budget issue, and then how you had to resolve that issue?
Sure. So let's look at what happened most recently with the pandemic,
Mhm.
right? And I'll give you another example as well. So with the pandemic, we we just had spring break, and then right after spring break, the global pandemic was declared a big thing, right? And
Right.
so we're like, all right, so we could uh, not take action to make sure that the health of our students and our employees is prioritized.
Right.
But we are a high institution of higher education. We also need to prioritize education. And so a lot of what we ended up having to do, and it's not just me, right? I mean, one thing is critical in the success of our institution is that I'm fortunate that I don't have to work alone. I get to work with a fantastic group of other deans and a great supervisor. Um, and so I have a budget. I can manage that. But if I need additional funds, I'm fortunate that I can go to my provost and say, I need X, Y, or Z things because we can't make things work otherwise, right? Um, so as we got into the uh, post or the pandemic period, starting in late March, April, we needed to buy a few equipments. We needed to suddenly find ourselves helping faculty members set up home offices,
Mhm.
uh, working with IT to make sure that they all have document cameras if they need one. If they needed webcams, they need webcams, headsets. I mean, these are things that we don't
No.
typically think about until we have to think about, right?
Right.
Because so that's one recent example. The other one was more of a long-term thing where I mentioned we are looking at demographic declines and enrollment challenges. So how do you maintain uh, the course offerings for students? And I mentioned small campuses, right? 500, 600, 700 students. And when that starts to drop down to 3, 400, all of a sudden the number of courses that you can offer and still be financially viable becomes harder.
Right.
So at that time, I worked with my campuses within my college system, and then we created partnership. We said, all right, why don't you offer the first course in physics in the physics sequence, and then we will receive that course through interactive television. And the next semester, we'll send you the second semester course sequence. So we were able to uh, not only make sure that our students get the courses that they need,
Mhm.
but we were also ensuring that we don't have to lay off instructors.
Right.
Um, and so those are some ways in which those resource management issues are tackled.
Right. And that's always like tough to like lay off people because you don't have the funds to actually keep them on. That's why the use of partnerships really helped in community building and, of course, giving higher education opportunities. And what would you say some skills are which are needed to help build partnerships and really run the administrative department?
And it all boils down, if I have to boil it down to one single trait, it's communication.
Right.
Uh, and written communication is probably one of the hardest things to do. With technology changes, um, we also have to sort of adapt to the idea that what. So let's take the example of email.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, we tend to use email as a substitute for formal letters. So we write it as if we are writing a formal letter,
Right.
but the speed is different. We also then are in a world where we want instant responses, and
Yes.
so then we try to do the same on email, going back and forth, and there's a lot of information that is lost in translation there. Tone is not captured very well
Mm-hmm.
in any written communication,
Yeah.
and so most of the times when I have encountered a challenge, it is largely because of misunderstandings as a result of communication or lack thereof sometimes, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
would say that's the most important uh, characteristic to ensure that regardless of whether I'm a dean or a faculty member, um, that's the number one thing I would say. And how do you do that is again varies. My approach is be honest, be transparent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I can make up stories about why I'm doing stuff, but I can't sustain that,
Right.
and it doesn't serve any purpose, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
on the other hand, if I have made a mistake, just fess up and move on.
Right.
Uh, and then most of the times people are gracious enough to accept that. Sometimes it takes longer.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of communication, I would say, is also being humble. Um, there's this concept of servant leadership. And I think that's such a valuable concept because if I am the dean and I say, all right, I sit in my high tower and start shooting orders, it's not going to work very well.
Right. And how would you say, because you have you have management issues, I mean, management problems, you have budget problems to like worry about. And does this schoolwork delve into your home life? Like, do you have to bring a lot of work home and do it there, or is it like what's at work stays at work, what's at home is there?
I think that striking that balance is always a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we live in a world, like I said, which still relies a lot on emails.
Right.
And sometimes that's the only way to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
There's also uh, the challenge of communicating in a timely fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And there are only so many hours. So to your point, yes, I mean, there are times during the year when work does unfortunately come home.
Mm-hmm.
So working later in the evening, either staying at work and working later in the evening or coming home, taking a little break and then continue working from home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, weekends are another time. I mean, that was true even as a faculty member,
Mm-hmm.
um, where if I have to give feedback in a timely fashion to a student, I mean, feedback is pointless if I don't give it in time, right? So if I have one assignment set up today, uh, and then another assignment coming up in a week's time, unless I give feedback on that first assignment within this week,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not helping my students learn and get better.
Right. Right.
So so to manage some of that, yeah, work does unfortunately sometimes have to come home, but um, I think there are ways in which I have tried to minimize that. When I can, I try to pick up the phone, talk to people, Right now, we are working off campus. Most of us are working from home.
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes it a little bit harder to get hold of people. Otherwise, I could just walk down the hallway, meet the person,
Right.
wrap up a situation in minutes rather than
Ah,
send an email, wait for a response, and then stretch it and drag it out,
right,
right? So,
right. And like before even the pandemic hit, the use of technology in our classrooms has been going up significantly by the use by schools giving us computers, giving us like normal iPads for everyone. So how would you say you have seen the incorporation of technology in your classrooms before the pandemic?
so I've always enjoyed playing around with technology. So I'll give you an example. When I landed up in my small 2-year college in Wisconsin,
Hmm.
I was like, all right, how do I get instant feedback? How do I figure out if students are learning, and how do I get it in a manner that is somewhat anonymous so students can actually share their responses?
Hmm.
And just talking around, I found that we had, prior to my arrival on campus, had spent a few $1,000s buying a portable clicker set. I don't know if your generation even knows what I'm talking about, right? Because these are essentially, I mean, think about a radio frequency device which captures instant responses, right? So you get uh, little remotes, if you will,
Hmm.
which have options A, B, C, D, and then you have a USB receiver
Hmm.
to plug it to your computer,
Hmm.
and I can ask a question on the screen, and students pick the option,
Hmm.
and then it captures it, and instantaneously I know who has answered what,
Um,
um, and I can display that as an aggregate, and then say, oh, 15 out of the 20 students didn't really answer that question well. All right, now that gives me data that I need to spend some more time on that particular concept.
mhm,
And so things like that, right? So we use that, and then very quickly that faded away because some of my two things happened. One, many of my colleagues on campus wanted to use that when they saw that this was helpful,
mhm,
uh, and we had limited clickers. So we said, okay, should we buy more clickers? I think we ended up buying a few more. Um, but then technology changed, and we were like, guess what? A lot of our students now have cell phones. We don't need the clicker set because there are web-based solutions through Poll Anywhere and things like that, which
right,
students can just respond using their cell phone.
mhm,
Then you're like, all right, cell phone, okay, great. Do I want to really give my own cell phone out? Was the other question to answer, right? So like, okay, let me try Google Voice,
mhm,
right? I can create a firewall essentially between my personal phone and my work phone, if you will,
right,
and still have the functionality and use of a cell phone,
mhm,
right? Um, so there have been various points where I've played around with those technology. If I look at what's happening today, where I'm for the last basically since 2016, I have not been actively in the classroom. I've been a full-time administrator, so
right,
I don't have the opportunity to be in the classroom and try out classroom technologies, but I get to work with faculty members and find out what's happening. And it's so fascinating. When I first started teaching, we used to use I taught in India for some time, and
mhm,
we used to have overhead projectors. We had to have transparencies. I don't know if you have seen those. I mean, these are
oh,
essentially
it's like,
films where you type things out or print things out or write on it, and then it projects out. And then when I came to the US, I was like, wow, document. I think in graduate school when I was teaching, we still had that. When I started teaching in Wisconsin, document cameras, like with the digital document cameras, you keep any document and it projects it out, and like fantastic.
mhm,
And now in a very short period, it's portable document cameras. I mean, they are essentially webcams on a stand, plug and play, and
mhm,
I can create my home office
just easily,
fairly quickly and easily. So I think it's fascinating to see those kind of technologies made available and faculty members using it. I mean, I recently was talking to some folks um, uh, who were using Twitch. I have not played around with Twitch, but I believe it's a gaming thing, right?
Yeah.
And some faculty members have been using Twitch to engage students in their class.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's just a great time to be in higher education because there are people who are willing to try out new things, and there's no dearth of technology. And I mean, it's a matter of trying it, and I think that's what I try to encourage. If there's a faculty member who says I want to try something and I can find the resources for them to try that out, I do my very best to do that. Right? I mean, it's not always possible for me to find funds to
Do it, but
find technology that they want to play around with, but when I can, I enjoy doing that.
that's fun. It would be fun to see my teacher on Twitch just streaming. That'd be something else. And
Yeah.
moving on to what you've done as a researcher. So along with being a professor or dean at this point, you're also a researcher who's conducted projects in stuff such as food retailing. So how would you say your responsibilities as a professional has differed from your responsibilities as a researcher?
So as I mentioned, since around 2016, I have not had the opportunity to be a faculty member in its true in the fullest sense, right? So
Mm-hmm.
philosophically, mentally, I still see myself as an educator. I still see myself as a teacher,
Right.
facilitator of learning, whatever is uh, works at that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so active research projects that I would have done as a faculty member
Mm-hmm.
have taken the shape of short-term projects, which still use the idea, the basic principles of research, where it starts off with identifying a problem, operationalizing the problem,
Mm-hmm.
gathering data,
Right.
analyzing the data, and then saying, okay, what's the best solution? But now I don't have the luxury of time and to go down to a field site and spend when I did my doctoral research, I spent 14 months studying the retail
Right.
sector there in Mexico. I don't have the time and luxury of doing that now. I would love to do that,
Mm-hmm.
but the aspects of research still continue on, right? So I recently I've been trying to gather data on, okay, um, how do these dual enrollment programs that we talk about, I don't know, Texas has a lot of that,
Yeah.
and how college students can get, high school students can get college credit, and not through just ACT
Right.
and CLEP exams, but literally while they are in high school, you're taking a college course and
Mm-hmm.
getting dual credit for that. How does that impact students' success in college? How does that create barriers for historically marginalized communities, right? So, for instance, we see a high correlation in the United States between the tax base of a neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
and the opportunities that schools can afford students in those neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, uh, how do we sort of uh, if these are successful models for students to accelerate through college and accelerate their learning,
Mm-hmm.
um, how do we make that possible for communities that have historically not had those opportunities? So I've been spending some time understanding how that works. How is the funding model? What can we do to interject and disrupt that pattern where underprivileged communities don't have access? How do we create that access, right? So uh, it all starts off with what's the problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then finding information, finding data, analyzing that, and coming to some possible solutions. So right now, that's what I've been trying to
Do.
uh, do in my own way.
Mm-hmm. And that's really good. And along at North Hennepin Community College, what are some research or volunteering opportunities that North Hennepin Community College offers for high school students or college students?
So we don't at this point have anything directly as an opportunity for high school students per se, to my knowledge, right?
Mm.
Um, but we do offer those opportunities when students are in those dual enroll programs.
Oh,
So when a student is in a is a in Wisconsin, in Minnesota, it's called PSEO, post secondary education opportunity,
mhm.
um, where the PSEO student is on our campus. They have access to all the research projects that faculty members do.
Oh,
So right now, we have a very active group in biology. We have a four-year institution with whom we have a partnership. And so while we are a two-year community college, our students don't have to leave our institution, our buildings to complete their four-year degree in biology, for instance, right? So we have a very active partnership. So um, we have research happening in the realm of DNA with looking at Drosophila, our wonderful fruit fly,
mhm,
which is probably the most studied living creature when it comes to genomics.
mhm,
And so our students often um, at the two-year level itself have the opportunity to participate in these research projects. I recently had the good fortune of seeing some of those presentations
mhm,
of students from two-year community colleges. So we routinely offer those kind of opportunities. There are internship opportunities in other disciplines, largely in uh, you see that in things like human services or in areas
mhm,
of business. Um, we within my division we have exercise science, and so we see a fair amount of research opportunities for students in exercise science,
mhm,
where they're looking at uh, not just literature review in physiology and kinesiology, but they are also actively collecting data um, on behavior towards exercise science. So an active project that my colleagues in exercise science are pursuing right now is something called exercise in medicine. It's sort of this idea that there's a strong preventive aspect of exercising, and it's medicinal in that sense. And when you look at what students are doing, I mean, they're basically gathering data from their peers and saying, okay, how are you? What is your behavior pattern when it comes to exercise? What are you doing? What are you not doing? And then connecting that to uh, literature research, and then so our students get quite a bit of exposure in those areas.
mhm. And yeah, and that's all the questions I have for you today, Mr. Anand. Thank you for being here, taking time out your day to come and sit for this interview. If you have any questions, I'll leave my Gmail down below. And yeah, bye.